Hey folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome. We are going to do a wrap video for When Eagles Fight. The game has ended, as you will know if you've been watching the series, with a kind of resounding German victory. And that's not terribly surprising. There's a couple of observations I'll make about the game as I played it, and then a couple of observations that I'll make about the game itself. For one thing, I feel like my play of the game, particularly of the Russians, was pretty inept. The Russians, I think, have the trickier strategic position between the two sides. The Central Powers have a weak spot in Austria-Hungary and a strong spot in up by Germany, and it's a matter of balancing the German effort. You'll notice that the game really turned around when the Germans actually did send some forces down to help the Austrians. So the Germans have to make a decision as to how much help they're going to give Austria-Hungary, but even a little bit of help will help the Austrians out tremendously, depending on how bad the Russians have positioned themselves to cope with that. On the other hand, the Russians have to make a larger decision in that they have to decide how to balance their forces between the two fronts in the first place. As the Russians focused almost exclusively on Austria-Hungary in an effort to score the early victory, and when that did not pan out, I was very poorly positioned as the Russians to respond to a Central Powers counterblow, which was heavy. I was very poorly positioned to deal with the German help that arrived from Austria-Hungary, and I was not able to reduce the strong positions that the Austro-Hungarians had built. So I think in future games, what I would try to do is either focus more on Germany and fight a defensive war against Austria-Hungary. Because if you could take Germany out, then the game is going to be over. In any case, in retrospect, I would certainly have put more forces opposing Germany and fewer forces opposing Austria-Hungary, and probably would not have tried for quite as early of a win as I was going for with the Russians. Additionally, even in the case of my effort as Russia against Austria-Hungary, it seems fairly clear that my strategy was not effective. In retrospect, I would have tried to I would try to punch through the middle of the Austrian forces and reduce the two sides, the east side and the west side of that front in detail. And additionally, I would have probably put some forces up in Poland to counter German efforts there, and to possibly push into Germany, which the Germans would have had to react to, even if that effort was not successful. So I see a lot of room for improvement in my play of the Russians in When Eagles Fight. Now, regarding the game itself, When Eagles Fight is very nice. It's very clean. It's very simple. It's an attractive-looking game. There's only about 15 pages of rules. I think it's a pretty newbie-friendly game. The fact that there are no zones of control does make sense in the context of a World War I game. It can make for some fairly gamey maneuvering, but it's also, I think, the case that zones of control are one of the things that someone totally unfamiliar with war games might get confused over, so not having them in this particular game makes it more newbie-friendly than it is. So the rules are not as well organized as I think they could be. There's some things that I missed because I think they were in an odd position in the book. I would have, in particular, have appreciated a more detailed sequence of play, so I made one. That's up on Board Game Geek now if you're interested in that. I do think the balance is pretty good, despite the evidence of the game I just played. Both sides have very nice strategic decisions, as I discussed before. As far as the components are concerned, I do think that the game would have handled a little easier with half-inch or 9/16 inch counters. I also feel like the Austro-Hungarian cores could have been individual counters instead of having like what appears to be a reduced strength side on the back side, but that's actually the replacement side. Once they're eliminated, they come back in as a lower strength unit. Now that's not something that I missed, so I was aware of that. I didn't miss that at all. But I probably accidentally flipped counters over to their full strength side at least a couple of times. There are a number of variants presented in the rulebook, which I think adds to replayability, and those variants actually look quite interesting. But even just the core game, I could see playing this another couple of times very easily. As far as playtime is concerned, I think the turns are good. The player turns are probably going to last somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes, so about 40 minutes a turn. So if the game goes 10 turns, that's going to be about 400 minutes or about 6 hours. So it's not a super quick game, but it is compact. It fits on a single map. You don't really need any player aids set up alongside it or anything like that. Although if you have the extra space, it certainly is not a bad idea. And there are some interesting play aids available on Board Game Geek that you could set up along with the game. So the game When Eagles Fight, a part of the World War One duel pack from GMT and designer Ted Rasier, does get a recommendation from me. I will at some point play through a game of 1914 Glory's End as well that is not a game that is physically bigger, but it does appear to me that it will take a substantially longer amount of time to play. So we'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, I feel like for the price of the World War One duel pack and the fact that you're getting already one quite good game out of it and another game that at least looks good, I think it's a pretty good value. So my final analysis of the entire package is not yet ready because I haven't played the other game. But this half of it I liked very much and will definitely play again.